A waitress paid for a hungry boy's meal. Hours later, her life changed forever. Welcome to Human Chapters. Please subscribe the channel for more videos like this. Let's get started. The rain pounded against the windows of the Blue Spoon Cafe, blurring the neon open sign into a hazy red glow against the dark afternoon sky. Maddie Winters wiped her hands on her worn apron and glanced at the clock for the 5th time in the last hour. 3 more hours until her shift ended, and she could finally pick up her 8-year-old daughter Lily from the neighbor who watched her after school. Maddie's feet ached in her second-hand shoes, the soles thin from years of rushing between tables. At 32, her once bright eyes now carried the weight of countless sleepless nights spent wondering how to stretch her meager paycheck to cover next month's rent, the electric bill that had just arrived with a bright red final notice stamp, and Lily's asthma medication. "Order up!" Gus, the gruff but kind-hearted cook, called from the kitchen, sliding a plate of meatloaf across the counter. Maddie forced a smile as she delivered the plate to table 7, a regular named Chester who always left exactly 15% tip, not a penny more or less. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked, her voice carrying a warmth that belied her exhaustion. "No, this looks great, Maddie," Chester replied, already cutting into his meatloaf. "How's that little girl of yours doing?" "Lily's wonderful," Maddie said, her eyes lighting up at the mention of her daughter. "She just got chosen to represent her class in the school science fair. She's building a model of the solar system all by herself." "Smart kid," Chester nodded. "Just like her mama." Maddie's smile grew genuine as she moved to clear the next table. Lily was indeed smart, brilliant, really, and it was for her that Maddie pushed through double shifts and ignored the pain in her back. Since Lily's father had walked out 6 years ago, it had been just the two of them against the world. Maddie had dropped out of nursing school when she became pregnant, promising herself she'd go back someday. That someday kept getting pushed further into the future as bills piled up and opportunities slipped away. The bell above the door jingled, piercing through the steady drumming of rain, and Maddie glanced up to see a small figure step inside, water dripping onto the worn linoleum floor. A boy, no older than 10 or 11, stood hesitantly in the entrance. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, his oversized jacket soaked through. Something about his solitary presence made Maddie's heart clench. Children didn't usually come into the Blue Spoon alone, especially not on a day like this. "Seat. Yourself anywhere, sweetheart," she called out, grabbing a menu from behind the counter. The boy chose a small booth in the corner, as far from the other customers as possible. As Maddie approached, she noticed how tightly he clutched a small, worn backpack to his chest, as if it contained all his worldly possessions. His fingers, red from the cold, trembled slightly as he opened the menu. "Hi there," she said gently, placing the menu in front of him. "Nasty weather out there, huh?" The boy nodded but didn't meet her eyes. His fingers, red from the cold, trembled slightly as he opened the menu. "Can I start you off with something hot to drink? Cocoa, maybe?" Another nod, still no eye contact. "1. Hot chocolate coming right up," Sarah said, resisting the urge to reach out and brush the wet hair from his forehead. Something in his demeanor, the careful way he held himself, the silence, reminded her of Emma when she was scared, but trying not to show it. When Sarah returned with the hot chocolate, topped with whipped cream and a sprinkle of cinnamon, a special touch she usually reserved for Emma, the boy had a $5 bill clutched in his hand. "Have you decided what you'd like to eat?" she asked. "How much is the grilled cheese?" His voice was so quiet Sarah had to lean in to hear him. $4.99, she replied. The boy looked down at his $5 bill, then back at the menu, his eyes scanning for something cheaper. "But today's special is a grilled cheese with tomato soup for $4.99, Sarah improvised. "It comes with a pickle, too." It wasn't a special, and it would normally cost nearly $8, but something told Sarah this child needed more than just a sandwich. The boy hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, please." As Sarah put in the order, she watched the boy from the corner of her eye. He sipped the hot chocolate slowly, savoring each taste as if it were a rare treat. He kept his backpack on the seat beside him, one hand always in contact with it. Occasionally, he would glance toward the door, as if expecting, or perhaps dreading, someone's arrival. When she brought his meal, the boy's eyes widened at the large bowl of soup and the generously stuffed grilled cheese cut diagonally, just the way Emma liked it. "Thank you," he whispered, and for the first time he looked directly at her. His eyes were a deep brown, filled with a sadness no child should know. Sarah felt a tug at her heart. "You're very welcome. Enjoy your meal." Throughout her shift, Sarah kept an eye on the boy. He ate methodically, taking small bites as if to make the food last as long as possible. Once, when Hank dropped a pan in the kitchen with a loud clatter, the boy flinched so violently that Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She recognized that reaction, the instinctive fear of unexpected noise. Emma had been the same way in the months after her father had left, when his drunken rages were still fresh in her memory. When the boy finished eating, he carefully wiped his mouth with his napkin and folded it neatly beside his empty plate. Then he took out his $5 bill and placed it on the table. He looked around uncertainly, perhaps realizing that he had nothing for a tip. Sarah approached with his check. $4.99, she confirmed, taking the $5 bill. She returned with a penny, which the boy stared at for a long moment before slipping it into his pocket. Is there someone I can call for you?" Sarah asked, unable to shake her concern for this solemn child sitting alone in her section. "It's still pouring out there." The boy shook his head. "No, thank you. I'm okay." His voice carried a forced maturity that broke Sarah's heart. As he gathered his backpack and prepared to face the storm again, Sarah made a split-second decision. "Wait," she said, reaching into her apron pocket. She pulled out a paper bag where she'd stored a homemade cookie she'd packed for her break. "For the road. It's chocolate chip." The boy looked at the cookie, then at Sarah, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing his face. "Really? For me?" "Really," Sarah nodded, smiling. The boy carefully took the cookie and tucked it into his backpack. Then, after a moment's hesitation, he pulled out a folded piece of notebook paper and placed it on the table. "Thank you," he said simply. And then he was gone, the bell jingling as the door closed behind him. Sarah watched through the rain-streaked window as the small figure disappeared around the corner. Then she picked up the folded paper, expecting perhaps a drawing. What she found instead were words written in careful, childish handwriting that caused her breath to catch in her throat. "Thank you for being nice to me. My mom died last week. This was her favorite place. The grilled cheese was good, just like she said." Sarah's hands trembled as she read the note again. She glanced toward the door, an impulse to run after the boy surging through her, but he was long gone. She folded the note carefully and tucked it into her pocket, trying to compose herself before returning to her other tables. But all through her shift, the boy's sad eyes and his devastating note lingered in her mind. When she finally clocked out at 8 o'clock, the rain had slowed to a light drizzle. Sarah hurried to Mrs. Abernathy's apartment, where Emma was staying until she finished work. Her daughter greeted her with a flying leap into her arms. "Mommy, I finished my solar system." "Mrs. Abernathy helped me hang the planets with fishing line." Sarah hugged Emma tightly, suddenly overwhelmed with gratitude that she could hold her daughter in her arms. "That's wonderful, sweetie. I can't wait to see it." After thanking Mrs. Abernathy, Sarah walked hand in hand with Emma to their small apartment 3 blocks away. As they climbed the 3 flights of stairs, the elevator had been temporarily out of order for the past 6 months. Sarah found herself thinking of the boy again. Where was he now? Did he have someone to tuck him in tonight, to make sure he was warm and safe? "Mommy, you're squeezing my hand too tight," Emma complained. "Sorry, Bug," Sarah said, loosening her grip. "Just thinking." Their apartment was small but tidy, with secondhand furniture Sarah had carefully refinished and walls decorated with Emma's artwork. After getting Emma bathed and into her pajamas, Sarah sat on the edge of her daughter's bed for their nightly ritual of stories and prayers. "And God bless Mommy and Mrs. Abernathy and Rocket the class hamster," Emma concluded her prayer. Then she paused, looking up at Sarah with those wise eyes that sometimes made her seem older than her 8 years. "And can we ask God to bless anyone else who needs it tonight, even if we don't know their names?" Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat. "That's a wonderful idea, Em." After Emma fell asleep, Sarah sat at their small kitchen table with a cup of tea and the boy's note. She read it again, wishing she had asked his name, wondering if there was anything else she could have done. She thought about calling child services, but what would she tell them? She had no name, no address, just a brief encounter with a sad-eyed boy who had lost his mother. The next day at work, Sarah kept watching the door, half expecting the boy to return. He didn't. She asked her coworkers if they'd ever seen a woman with a young son who loved grilled cheese, but in a busy diner like Rosie's, where hundreds of people came through each week, no one could recall anyone specific. 3 days passed, and though the boy remained in Sarah's thoughts, the immediate urgency of her concern began to fade beneath the constant pressure of everyday life. The electric bill was due, Emma needed new shoes, and Sarah had picked up an extra shift to cover a coworker's vacation. It was during this extra shift, a slow Tuesday afternoon, that the bell above the door jingled, and Sarah looked up to see a tall man in an expensive suit enter the diner. He seemed out of place among the regular customers in their work clothes and casual wear. His eyes scanned the room with purpose before settling on Sarah. "Can I help you?" she asked as the man approached the counter. "Are you Sarah?" he asked, his voice deep and cultured. "Sarah Jensen?" Sarah tensed slightly. She wasn't expecting anyone, and how did this stranger know her name? "Yes, that's me." The man held out his hand. "My name is Richard Harrison. I believe you met my nephew, Michael, a few days ago." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "The boy? The one who was here alone?" Richard nodded, his composed expression faltering for a moment. "Yes, I've been searching for him since my sister, his mother, passed away suddenly. He ran away from the temporary foster home he was placed in. I was out of the country when it happened, and by the time I returned," he paused, collecting himself. "Michael finally called me yesterday from a shelter. He had your note." "My note?" Sarah was confused. "He left me a note, but I didn't—" "The cookie," Richard explained. "You wrapped it in a napkin with your name on it," Sarah remembered now. The napkins at Rosie's had the server's name printed on them, a gimmick the owner thought added a personal touch. "Michael told me what you did for him," Richard continued. "The special price, the extra food, the kindness you showed him." Sarah shook her head dismissively. "It was nothing, really. I was worried about him. Is he okay now? Is he with you?" "He's safe," Richard assured her. "He's staying with me while I sort out the guardianship paperwork, but he's been through a lot. Watching his mother battle cancer for the past year, losing her, being placed with strangers, it's been hard on him." Sarah's heart ached for the boy, Michael. "I wish I could have done more." "That's actually why I'm here," Richard said. "Michael hasn't spoken much since his mother died, but he talked about you, about how you were kind like his mom." He hesitated, then asked, "Would you be willing to come see him? I think it might help him to see a face he associates with kindness." Sarah was surprised by the request. "Of course, but I'm working now and I need to pick up my daughter after school." "I understand," Richard said quickly. "Perhaps another time. Could I leave you my card?" He handed her a business card with an embossed logo, Harrison Architectural Group. Below it was his name, Richard Harrison, CEO. "I've written my personal number on the back," he said. "Please call when you might be available. Any time would be appreciated." After Richard left, Sarah stared at the card. The Harrison Architectural Group was well known even to someone like her who knew nothing about architecture. They had designed several prominent buildings downtown, including the new public library that Emma loved to visit. That evening, after much deliberation, Sarah called the number. To her surprise, Richard answered immediately, and by the weekend, arrangements had been made. Richard sent a car to pick up Sarah and Emma on Saturday afternoon. "Where are we going, Mommy?" Emma asked as they settled into the luxurious town car, her eyes wide with excitement. To visit a little boy who's very sad because his mommy died, Sarah explained gently. He needs some friends right now. Emma nodded solemnly. Like when Lizzie's dad died and we brought her cookies and sat with her. Exactly like that, Bug. The car took them to a stately brownstone in a part of the city Sarah had only glimpsed from bus windows. Richard greeted them at the door, thanking them profusely for coming. Inside, the home was elegant but comfortable, with warm lighting and walls lined with bookshelves. Michael was sitting in a window seat staring out at the garden. When Richard quietly announced their arrival, the boy turned, and Sarah saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Hello, Michael," she said softly. "It's nice to see you again. This is my daughter, Emma." Emma, usually shy with strangers, stepped forward with purpose. "I'm sorry about your mom," she said simply. "It must hurt a lot in your heart." Michael nodded, his eyes filling with tears. "When I'm sad," Emma continued, "my mom lets me pick 3 stories and makes hot chocolate with tiny marshmallows. Do you like stories?" The ice was broken. By the time an hour had passed, Emma had shown Michael her favorite book that she'd brought along, and the 2 children were sitting side by side on the window seat, talking quietly. Sarah watched in amazement as Michael gradually opened up to Emma's gentle chatter. "She's remarkable," Richard said, joining Sarah on the couch. "Your daughter?" "She is," Sarah agreed, her heart full as she watched Emma coax a small smile from Michael. "I can't thank you enough for coming," Richard said. "This is the most engaged I've seen him since everything happened." Sarah turned to Richard, seeing the grief etched in his face as well. "I'm so sorry about your sister." Richard nodded, his composure slipping momentarily. "Caroline was incredible. A single mother, working as a music teacher, raising Michael on her own after her husband left. She did everything for that boy." He sighed heavily. "I should have been there more. I was always so busy with work, traveling. I didn't even know how sick she was until it was almost too late." The regret in his voice was palpable, and Sarah recognized it all too well. The constant fear of not doing enough, of somehow failing the child who depended on you. "You're here now," she said gently. "That's what matters." Their visit extended into the evening, with Richard ordering dinner for all of them. As they ate, Michael began to open up more, especially to Emma, who treated him with the matter-of-fact compassion that children sometimes manage better than adults. What started as a one-time visit became a regular occurrence. Every weekend, Richard would send a car for Sarah and Emma, and the 4 of them would spend the day together. Sometimes they visited museums or parks, other times they stayed at Richard's home, playing board games or watching movies. Sarah watched, as Michael slowly began to heal, his smiles becoming more frequent, his voice stronger. Through these visits, Sarah also came to know Richard better. Beneath his polished exterior was a man struggling with grief and the sudden responsibility of raising his nephew. He confided in Sarah about his fears of not being enough for Michael, of somehow failing his sister's memory. "I design buildings," he admitted one evening as they sat on his terrace, watching the children play in the garden below. "I know nothing about raising a child." "None of us do, not really," Sarah replied. "We're all just figuring it out as we go along." As summer turned to fall, Sarah found herself looking forward to these weekends more than she cared to admit. Emma and Michael had become inseparable friends, their bond forged through shared experiences, Emma understanding the pain of an absent father, Michael helping her through the lingering fear that her mother might someday leave too. And then there was Richard. Sarah couldn't pinpoint exactly when their conversations had shifted from discussions about the children to deeper sharing of their lives, their dreams, their fears. But she found in him someone who listened, really listened when she talked, about her abandoned nursing studies, about the daily struggle to provide Emma with the opportunities she deserved. One rainy Sunday afternoon in October, nearly 6 months after that fateful day in the diner, Richard asked Sarah to stay after, Emma and Michael had fallen asleep watching a movie. "I have a proposition for you," he said, his tone unusually formal. "Professional, not personal," he added quickly, noting her expression. Sarah felt a twinge of disappointment she wasn't ready to examine too closely. What kind of proposition? My company is opening an on-site childcare center for employees, Richard explained. We need someone to run it, someone with experience caring for children, who understands their emotional needs as well as their physical ones. Sarah stared at him. And you want me? Richard, I don't have any formal qualifications. I'm a waitress. You're a mother who put her own dreams on hold to raise her daughter, Richard interrupted. You're someone who showed kindness to a lonely child when there was nothing to gain from it. You're someone who connects with people, who cares deeply. He leaned forward. The position comes with a full benefits package, including tuition assistance. You could finish your nursing degree. Sarah felt dizzy with possibility. But why? Why me? Richard's expression softened. Because I've seen how you are with Michael, with Emma. Because in all my years of building things, I've rarely met someone with such natural ability to build people up. He hesitated, then added more quietly, and because I think Caroline would have liked you very much. 2 weeks later, Sarah gave notice at Rosie's diner. Her coworkers threw her a small going-away party, and even Walter, the regular with his precise 15% tip, brought her a card signed by many of the diner's patrons. The child care center position changed everything for Sarah and Emma. They moved to an apartment closer to Richard's company, in a neighborhood with better schools. Sarah enrolled in evening nursing classes, finally resuming the education she had abandoned years ago. Emma thrived in her new school, her friendship with Michael continuing to deepen. And Richard became a fixture in their lives. At first, his visits were ostensibly about Michael and Emma's friendship, but soon he was helping Emma with her science homework, joining them for dinner, becoming the steady male presence that both Sarah and Emma had lived without for so long. On Christmas Eve, a year after their first meeting at the diner, Richard invited Sarah and Emma to join him and Michael for the holiday. As the children hung ornaments on an enormous tree in Richard's living room, he led Sarah to the window seat where Michael had been sitting that first day. I have something for you, he said, handing her a small, wrapped package. Inside was a framed copy of the note Michael had left for Sarah at the diner, preserved behind glass. Beside it was a new note, this one in Richard's handwriting. Thank you for showing kindness when it was needed most. You changed not one life that day, but 3. Sarah looked up, tears blurring her vision, to find Richard watching her with unmistakable tenderness. I never believed in fate, he said quietly. I built my career on plans, on certainty. But then Michael ran away to his mother's favorite diner, and you gave him a cookie and a napkin with your name on it, and somehow our broken pieces found a way to fit together. Outside, snow began to fall, casting a gentle glow through the windows. In the background, Emma was teaching Michael how to place tinsel on the tree, just so, their laughter filling the room with the kind of joy that comes after sorrow, sweeter for having known its opposite. Sarah looked at the framed notes in her hands, at the 2 children by the tree, at the man beside her who had become so dear to her heart. A simple act of kindness on a rainy afternoon had set in motion a chain of events she could never have imagined. Some things you plan, she said softly, reaching for Richard's hand. And some things you just have to have faith in. As Richard's fingers interlaced with hers, Sarah thought about the countless small choices that make up a life, the decisions to keep going when it would be easier to give up, to offer kindness when there's nothing to gain, to open your heart after it's been broken. She thought about the boy in the diner, soaked from the rain, and how neither of them could have known that day that they were each other's answered prayers. The snow continued to fall outside, transforming the world with its quiet magic. Much like the way love transforms lives, not in grand, sweeping gestures, but in small moments of grace, in grilled cheese sandwiches and chocolate chip cookies, in notes written on napkins, and in the courage to believe that after the darkest storms, light will always return.